Right, I think we'll get started. Other people can join us from this place. So thank you ever so much for joining us for our second week at the Working From Home Talks. I'm joined today by Simon and Fenella. Would you like to both introduce yourself, who you are, what you normally do, where people can find you? Simon, you first.
Morning, Barry. Morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Simon Tyler. I've been a coach for a long time, 20 years, I guess, or so now, and moved my coaching business quite successfully into more speaking and events, which in the light of what we're now facing in a world was not a good move because there are no events and no speaking. So I'm one of those people I've officially furloughed myself in my own company for the foreseeable future. But I tend to speak and on three main topics. I've written a number of books, and the three main topics I speak on are simplicity, attitude, and impact. And that's more or less the title of the three main books that feature my work. Being called Simon meant I was cursed with being called Simple Simon all my life, and I railed against it. But eventually, when I was coached some 10 years ago or more, my coach said to me, "Why don't you just accept it?" Oh, okay. And I did. And since that point, yes, I've been called Simple Simon and been more gracefully received that as the moniker to describe me. But my coaching work still continues with people who are board level, running businesses, and my coaching tends to have shifted to become perhaps a little bit more mentoring, in that the dialogues with me help people sort their thinking out. And that's today what I'm going to be talking about. I'm specifically talking about what happens to your thinking generally.
Fantastic. And I think your books are there, just behind me.
Oh, there they are.
On my bookshelf.
Oh, look at you, Barry. And the main one which I'm talking about today probably is this one, which is the Attitude book, which is even more pertinent for everybody nowadays. I don't know whether Amazon still stock it, but if you can't find it, ask me and I'll send you one. I've got a small stock and they're sitting doing nothing at the moment, so I'll send them to people.
Fantastic. And Fenella, could you introduce yourself and what you do?
Hi, my name's Fenella Hemus, and I am a personal development and performance trainer and coach. So I am an NLP trainer. I also train people in hypnosis and timeline therapy. I've been involved in people development probably for, 25 years in various guises. So I actually started working with children, which is where my interest in human development started, and people achieving their full potential. And my background is adventure playground. So I've had a really circuitous journey to where I am now, but I think it kind of relates to what I'm going to be speaking about.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. I'm lucky enough to have been on a training course and gone through NLP training with Fenella, and it was very good, very enlightening, and looking forward to doing some more in the future. October, I think, is our next session. So thank you ever so much both for joining us. So as we go through, if you've got any questions you'd like to ask those that are presenting, please put them in the chat or the Q&A feature in this webinar, and I will ask them at the specific point for you guys. If Fenella and myself want to turn our cameras off now and mute, we'll pass over to Simon for his presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Well, first of all, as I'm sure most people do, is that they take in the scenery of what we're looking at. I've been one of those people who attempted to shave my own hair, and my children remotely have said to me, I now look like Sid, who's the nasty next door neighbor in Toy Story. So if those of you who've watched Toy Story and you know Nasty Sid, that's what my hair looks like. So apologies for that. So I've not done a good job on my hair. And also behind me is the world map, which curiously, there's Wuhan just in here for us, so that's the start of it all is behind me. Anyway, today I'm talking about food for thought, and I wrote about this a few weeks ago in a simple note, which I send those out every couple of weeks, and it made me realize perhaps a little bit more clearly about our thinking. And our thoughts come and go, and there's lots been written about and talked about in terms of where the thoughts come from, but they tend to just roll and they're coming in all the time. It's been said that we have 60,000 odd thoughts a day, more or less one a second, and it's the ones that we hold on to and pull them in. It's almost as the thoughts are going past and potentially causing something, they trigger more thinking, and the ones that we grab, they'll trigger thinking associated to that first thought. So thoughts are being peppered at us all the time. And beyond the thinking, then potentially, as soon as we embed that thought a bit more with wrap up with some more thinking, we turn it into a feeling, we feel that way, and then the feelings then seem to trigger more thoughts. So knowing this just at that high level made me realize, and lots of my work over the years, is that we get a choice in this, although a lot of the time it feels like we don't. It feels like a thought has come, I've grabbed it, I've thought about it, I feel good, bad, whatever, and the next series of thoughts carry on. So with what's happening to us all right now, it made me realize that all the time we're feeding our thinking, unknowingly most of the time. And with what's going on in the world right now, there's a lot coming at us. And if we're not heightening our awareness, then we're at the risk of our whole mood system changing, and significantly, our immune system is linked to this and changes. And in doing some research for the article I wrote a few weeks ago, there's so much information. Lots of universities and studies have been done about this. And the one particular one, which I quoted many, many years ago, it's 10, 15 years old, the University of Wisconsin. They studied, and two large sample sized groups of people. And with one group, they were monitoring the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that becomes active and it makes us different from other animals. One group of people, they got them to sit and dwell about things that weren't great, things that were distressing. And they monitored their prefrontal cortex activity. And they noticed that the mood and tone dropped, and their immune system also dropped. And by absolute contrast, unsurprisingly, the group of they asked to sit and dwell on happy thoughts and positive things, the prefrontal cortex monitoring, they spotted significant increase in the number of antibodies that were created having dwelled on happy thoughts, which boosted the immune system. So knowing that piece of research, amongst the sea of researchers done this, it just confirms to me we get a choice in all this. We get a choice about how we feel and what we think about, even though, as I say, most of the time it feels like it's just happening to us. Now, earlier this year, in January, February, I had a bit of a really introspective 2 or 3 weeks, and I started to lose my way and wasn't sure what the hell I was doing. I became discombobulated and doubted myself, was worried about things, and I went into this quite a dark malaise. And I worked with another guy who helps me build with the business development work, and he's very chipper and just says to me, "Carl, get on with it, write the simple note, get on with what you need to do," which was good, and it bolstered me along. But I still went through this really dark period, and it's almost as if that fed me for this particular point about food for thought. What was I feeding my thinking? Where was I going? And I looked at, what was going on for me? Where did I go? What's coming at me? So my challenge for you in terms of food for thought is, and I came up with 5, and it's not the definitive list. You can categorize these in the way that suit you. But the 5 that I've come up with, and they were in discussion with a number of people who've gone through some of this journey with me. And the first category is news, as one of the foods that you will digest. And right now, news is clearly single subject. And we have, for many, many years now, had 24-hour live stream news. So the constant rapacious hunger for news. And if you tune into that, it naturally is going to make you go. The thoughts are going to take you with the mood of the story. And they tend not to be upbeat mood stories. So notice what the news does to you. My whole point about what I'm talking about here today with food for thought is to heighten your awareness of the reaction on you. Slight detour. I remember working with a guy in Bath, and Team Breakthrough, Dave Wilby, and he was working with me on some fitness and health regime, and as part of it, he invited me to keep a food log. And all I had to do was just write down what I'd eaten, and he wasn't telling me to change my diet, and 2 hours later, write down how I felt. did I feel, and particularly did I feel bloated and so on and so forth. But it made me realize that some foods did change my mood. And the same applies here. So through all my 5 categories I'm sharing with you, I'm inviting you within an hour or two, or probably less, what's been the effect on your thinking? Where does it take you? So the news stories first. There's so much news out there. And because news is on the go all the time, there are insufficient facts to fill news stories. So there's a lot of subjective information and opinions. Notice that. I remember doing a piece of work some years ago with a bank. It was a division of Royal Bank of Scotland. And it was the day when the Royal Bank of Scotland had they nosedived. I think it was the late 2000s. And there are a number of people in the room, 16 people I was working with on that day on a relationship development course, I think. And they were really obviously dramatically hit and struggling with what was going on. It's like, whoa, what is going on? And I thought I need to do some work with them to help them get hold of their thinking and to get more into tuning into the news. And this is where this came up, been with me a long time. And we did a fact or opinion review of all of the newspapers that were in the room, the hotel that we were working in. And I asked them to underline the facts and circle the opinions. And by the way, this is a piece of work that my daughter was doing at school, more or less, as part of their English work, which I found quite curious. But what it proved to us through all of the newspapers that were there in that room were the paucity of facts and the volume of opinions that were building on the facts, clearly. So this alerted me to this whole point about news. So category 1, I'm alerting you to the effect that news has on you. For sure, for your job, for your well-being, for obvious guidance right now, you need to tune into some of the news. The government broadcast of an evening, whatever it might be, you decide. But you might need to, just with food, start to minimize your intake of news. It doesn't mean you're in denial, because if there's something you need to know, you'll find out. It's coming at us all the time. But just be aware of how news makes you feel. If you feel great, good, go with it. If it makes you feel in any way slightly deficient, you need to prune that out, or at least reduce that volume of that food. Second category is comedy, which it's tough in tough times to find your sense of humor and restore your sense of humor. But look at different types of comedy. There's some quite pertinent, insightful comedy that can give you a rib tickle, a belly laugh. That's really important right now. Again, more evidence says when we're laughing, it causes a great boost of positive body chemicals. You might need to introduce new comedians into the mix. Again, tune in to how a comedian makes you feel. Some of them are a bit cutting, and their humor might cause you to just feel a bit dark and low, rather like how I was in January, February. So my advice in that category of food is, again, tune into it. Maybe look for some of the new comedians. I've added a few more to my Instagram feed who I find funny, make me laugh, and it gives me a lighter side. It gives me a degree of refreshed, feels warmer, feels lighter. And I've not taken out some other comedians who are a little bit too close to the wire, and just, as much as it's funny, it doesn't take me anywhere. Linked to that is the third category, which is fiction. This is an interesting food product, I think, for our thinking. Because for a while, fiction can be wonderful escapism. And escapism is good. It feels almost like exercise if it were a food, to keep going with that metaphor. So with the fiction, that might mean what you consume on TV, films, dramas, the books you read, the audio books you consume, is, again, just to monitor where you go. For a while, escapism is wonderful because, it lightens the load of too much heavy thinking. Just monitor that volume of your food. Then there's the final two categories, category 4 and category 5, I find really interesting. This is where some good work could be done for you to develop your thinking, to help you survive and fly and become so productive and buoyant and positive to so many other people if you can work these two groups successfully. Group 4 is provokers. So in the provoker group, I would put people who perhaps are leading edge thinkers. They are potentially controversial. They're on the edge of current thinking. They're pushing ideas. They're stretching thinking. They might be experts in certain fields. They might be idea generators or challengers, one of which I watched a Noam Chomsky, who I really like all of his work for many, many years, and he's still going, and he was interviewed last week on a webinar, and I find that quite useful. In the provoker bunch, tune into, if you add 1 or 2 into your diet, because it will help you expand your thinking. But again, warning is, some provokers might start to trigger thoughts in you of self-doubt and worry and concern. Monitor that. There's no point in tuning into that if it's going to do that to you. I find that when I'm tuning into a provoker, if I find myself nodding as I'm listening, that's a physical clue that I'm finding alignment. I'm joining in with the thinking. And even more, another insightful piece for me on when I'm tuning into a provoker is I tend to make notes. I'm driven to make notes, not because I have to, because it starts to trigger new thinking. I like that. It feeds positive thinking. So again, be aware of those. And the 5th category is inspirers. They're obviously, and the fact that you're tuning into these series of talks, the working from home talks, probably means you're in the group looking for inspirers. Well done you. But there are people out there who are producing a lot of content right now that is really inspirational, that's slipping through in a sea of content. So we're not sure, is that inspirational or is it just bland repetition of stuff? There's a lot of very powerful inspirational work out there. Tune into it. Audios help me. I like to consume audios, and that still allows us to access people who've passed away. Wayne Dyer, one of my absolute heroes, who passed away 3 or 4 years ago, I'm still able clearly to tune into some of his work. But it might be webinars, it might be audio books, it might be YouTube videos. There's a lot of stuff out there. Just like your food diet, you might need to actively, inverted commas, shop for it to add it to the mix of your work. And with inspirers, I'm not sure you can overfeed on this, other than it will use up time, but it will help you go through a sense of renewal. And just go back to that original piece of research I mentioned from the University of Wisconsin. It's going to help your antibodies to improve your immune system. Add that to sitting in the sun for 20 minutes a day, and you get a bit of vitamin D, and all of a sudden, you're in a better, stronger place than perhaps you would have been otherwise. So in all of those categories of food, as I've described them, the main point is just to be aware of what each causes and change your diet. The sugary equivalent is too much of one thing. And you'll know, because it will leave you feeling dark and down and in a bit of a malaise. Monitor that, notice that. And there's one extra piece, a caveat, and perhaps more than one, there's always more than one, but the one extra caveat in there is it's the gaps. The gaps between eating, so your food for your thought. What can you do in those gaps? And in the gaps, potentially, is the time when, yes, you can digest that food that you consumed, but it's where you find peace, stillness. It's even more important right now, because lots of people, when they work from home, quite often have a sense of guilt and responsibility and work, and become so productive and so busy, they cut out the gaps. And the gaps are important. If you've got a meditative practice, cool, do that. For many people, they haven't. They can't really get into the meditation thing and mindfulness exercise like that. All it needs is just to sit still for 2 or 3 minutes. And in those 2 or 3 minutes, things will just calm down. Your prefrontal cortex will be juggling stuff. Some of the work I've done recently, in fact, over a long period of time now, is to notice a feeling as it comes up. And as a feeling comes up for me, if I don't like it, I'm curious about it. I'm just curious about what it is, because it makes me feel odd. I'll give you a very silly example, flippant-ish example, but hopefully it proves the point. Last week, my cat brought a mouse in as a presentation for me, dropped it at my feet, great. Mouse was still alive, ran away. It's like, oh, great. Do I try and find it, or do I leave him to do what cats do? So I did that for a while, and a bit later on, I saw he caught it. Then he took it into my bedroom, and he dropped it again. Oh, hopefully he'll catch it again. So I ignored him, left him alone, carried on watching a film or whatever I was watching. And later on, I felt this feeling of, it became disappointment, concern, worry, fatigue. And before I investigated it, it started to trigger some new thinking of, well, we're in the effects of COVID-19. My business has effectively dried up right now. Oh, disappointment. And my thinking started to run. I thought, whoa, okay, stop here. Let's wind the clock back. Where was that thinking? So it was worry and concern that what's going on for me right now that's real? The mouse. Maybe it was that. I went into the bedroom, cat's still in there, had caught it. Cat was now, the mouse was now deceased. I thought, okay, it's done. And I realized that emotion. I was able to notice it, pick it out, and let it go. And within a few minutes, I really palpably felt it subside. As I say, silly example, but quite often there might be one cause or two or three little causes. It's worth just noticing, what am I experiencing right now? Where might it be rooted? Can I let it go? And that process can relieve it too. I'm going to talk about one more piece, which I wrote about in the Attitude book, which is about the music we listen to. So maybe it's another category. But in the Attitude book, I wrote an article, one of the chapters is specifically about music. And my son, when he was at university, he had one track. He was a dreadful studier. He would never do revision all through his career. But the one track that helped him get there was from the film The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. There was one particular piece of music which he found inspiring, uplifting, made him sit still, listen to it, and he could tune his concentration in. He was, astrophysics he was studying, so deep, way beyond my head. But it was that one particular tune, and he sort of got into the program that when he heard it, right, I'm in the mood. When he hears it now, he feels more studious, bizarrely. So then tune in, again, heighten your awareness to the effect of the music you listen to. Some music, again, there's been studies that have proved this. Some music can uplift you, some can mellow you, and some can leave you feeling pretty dark. When you're in a particular state and you need to go up, then you might need to change your playlist, which is the name of the chapter. And my final piece, before I open up to questions, and I hope I'm not overrun, Barry, is another article. I think this might be in the Keep It Simple book, which is about the people you spend time with. And the people we spend time with right now are clearly our colleagues, but remotely, by webinar, etc., or on the phone, is just to do a quick assessment of the people that have a positive effect on you, the people who have a neutral effect on you, and the people who have a draining effect on you. If you've spent a week and you've populated your itinerary and your schedule with people that have drained you, no surprise, you will feel drained. It's one of those. And it might mean that the mix of the appointments you have, the webinars you tune into, the work conversations you have, make sure the mix is at least balanced between the plus people and the minus people, and using neutral people, but increasing the people who have a positive effect on you. And you'll know it. You'll know you have a conversation with someone and you feel great. You have a conversation with someone else, you just feel crap. I'm sorry if you feel that's good, but notice that. And if become aware of the effect you have on other people. But if you do the work on your food for your thought, then probably you're going to move yourself into the positive category. I've rattled on, Barry. Hopefully that was helpful, and I haven't gone on too long.
No, perfect timing. So if anyone has any questions for Simon, please feel free to put them in the chat or Q&A now. Simon just grabbed your book off my shelf. So I've got the Attitude book right here. And the first page I turn to is the Attitude 23, Fake Truth. And I think at the moment, in the kind of place we are with misinformation and people grappling on what you've just spoken about, fantastic advice inside that book as to how to handle all these different attitudes that are around us.
Yeah, Fake Truth. That was an obvious one. There he is. Yeah. And
right in the middle of the book, I think. So it's like you almost planned it. So I've got one question here. What if you live with people that drain you?
I'm not a marriage guidance counsellor. I can't help that. So that's very true. There are things you can do. Some years ago, I have to be mindful that some people probably know some of my extended family. I had a challenge with, let's say, a member of my family. So I lived directly next door to the in-laws, and the relationship was really challenging and draining. And I was working with a coach at the time, and he helped me work this through, which was, one, minimize the time you spend with them. It's obvious. If that's somebody you actually live with and you're in quarantine with them right now, okay, there's a number of things you can do. Firstly, every time you're with them, breathe and think of 3 things that you love, respect, or admire. And I found that really hard to get going, but that was absolutely the case. So I'd run through it, and I'd try and be different every time. 3 things I love. I love the way he thinks. It's different to me. I love the way he's always ready to get involved in stuff, and so on. So that process, what it did is it retuned my attitude of connection to that person. So you can work that through, but it really takes effort. And it means you need to find calmness, in which case do some food for thought stuff to make sure you're in good shape health-wise, and then run through the 3 things that you find positive or you respect or admire about them. And that really can quite often just shift the way you connect with them.
Fantastic. And one more question before we pass over to Fenella. So you started at the beginning saying that effectively you've had to furlough yourself. The nature of your business means that there's a bit of a drought at the moment. How do you energize yourself? How do you kind of get yourself up in the morning and energize yourself for the day in this changing time that we are at the moment?
Good question. And I'm not unique, but the world in which I practice is, as I say, lots of speeches and events which have all gone. And I still have some coaching clients. So they've moved to telephone or webinar related dialogues. But I'm really okay with everything. I've got a sign, which I've taken off my wall because I'm painting, which I'll show you there. Can you do that? Can you see what it says? Everything is going to be okay, which is one of my favorite statements. And when I do attitude work with teams and with people, I quite often ask them to come up with a phrase that is their middle point of their attitude, what they really want. And that for me is mine. Everything is going to be okay. And I say that, and I know it so much, and it just pulls me back to the middle all the time. So as soon as my attitude drifts down, I can pull back to the middle, and it means I can potentially go forward. I'm really okay with what's going on. Of course, I don't want it to be like this. I want my work to be vibrant, but it's okay. I'm so accepting of this. And there's a number of other simple notes I've written in the various books that talk about this, about the ability to let go of the stuff that doesn't feel good, about accepting things as they are right now fully. That stops the resistance, release the resistance I have to everything. And I'm okay with it. And if I don't know what to do, I've become even happier now to just sit and just let a little bit of space open up and think, it's this. And that's probably why painting my office bubbled up to the surface. It's that. Things will bubble. The brain is a brilliant, brilliant thing. Listen to it.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Simon.